Hey, what's up, dudes? Welcome back to the channel and welcome back to another Dead by Daylight video. Today we're going to be talking about killers that I think could be survivors, as we kind of started the conversation the other day with me making a video about who I thought the mid-chapter 21.5 paragraph survivor could be. If you don't know about that big leak that basically says that we're getting a licensed killer next with no survivor, and then a survivor with no killer at the mid-chapter, I'll link that video right here at the top if you guys want to watch that. Now, the conversation was sparked because I think the next survivor could possibly be Evan McMillan. I think it's being built up in the tomes, through the archives, through what we're learning, and through some videos that we actually see from this tome that were data mined or leaked or whatever else. So we're going to be talking about that today. Before we get into it, if you guys do enjoy the video, I'd really appreciate a like on the video. It helps us out, helps out visibility with the video, more people finding it. So that is very, very appreciated. And also, if you want more videos like this for Dead by Daylight, make sure to subscribe to the channel. But with that out of the way, let's go ahead and jump into it. Now, as I said, we made the video on Evan McMillan already. Pre-Trappy Boy, when the entity first brought him in, I'll give you a very short overview of his backstory. When he was first brought in, he did not want to be a killer. The entity went out of its way to break down Evan McMillan and turn him into the Trapper. That's why the Trapper's character model has hooks all in him, because that is from when he was rejecting the entity and not succumbing to its ways. So he was actually a survivor first. That's where this whole theory comes from, but that sparked this video. So the first character we're going to talk about is actually the nurse. And no, I'm not talking about the new lore nurse from the tomes and archives, because that is kind of bad. There's a couple characters on here that I will be talking about with new lore and old lore, and the nurse is the one for the old lore. See, in her old lore, she was just a normal nurse. She worked at the Crotus Pen Asylum. It says nobody sought employment there unless they were in dire need, just like Sally. Without any education, she started at the bottom doing the hard night shift. Over the years, her mind had reached its limits. 2 decades of seeing horrid things that violate the eyes. Memories that are replayed every night, being abused verbally and physically by people without limits. Sally saw insanity from the outside just to catch it herself. Finally, she could not take it anymore, and concepts of purification emerged inside her. She did what she felt was necessary. As the morning staff arrived one day in September, they found over 50 dead patients, lifeless, in their beds, along with 4 staff members also dead. So she was kind of just like a normal nurse who worked at an insane asylum and eventually went crazy herself, because insane asylums back in presumably around the early 1900s, when she was actually, you know, not a killer and just a normal person getting ready to go insane, they were not under the best standards. So the staff, there would be a lot of riots, people would get killed, and I mean, this is just history, you can look this up. There was a lot of asylum riots, a lot of guards and workers, nurses were killed, and there was even a few cases of nurses actually doing this shit and like snapping, and doctors doing this shit and snapping. So I really think that the entity could pull her from the time before she lost her mind, and she could actually be a survivor. And it's not even like a weird thing to say that this could happen, even though she wasn't like Evan and pulled in and like resisted the entity or whatever. She was pulled in after she went nuts. But there's also no rhyme or reason to any other survivor really being pulled in, except for maybe Elodie and Felix. So not having that rhyme or reason is already there with a lot of the other survivors, just wandering into the wrong place at the wrong time. So maybe they pull her from an alternate timeline where a strange psych patient came in, and he was just really weird, and he was working for the entity or whatever else, and it pulled her in. You know, they could do a ton with the story. I don't write the story, I don't write the lore, so I don't put a whole lot of thought into it past what I do for these videos, but I think they could come up with an interesting story to pull pre-Madness Sally into the fog as a survivor. Now, the next one is Lisa Sherwood, the Hag. Now, this is going off of new lore, and I know not a ton of people like her new lore, but I actually do. Actually, not having her as a girl who just grew up in the Backwoods Swamp, and actually having her be a girl who just came across her grandma's old spell book or whatever else, bro, her book of like etchings or, you know, hexes, whatever you want to call them, and having like that one dumb friend that actually breaks all the shit out and eventually dies from it. And we're still seeing that story expanded when it comes to the Hag in future tomes and everything else. We've only got a small piece of it so far, but from the way the character actually is in her backstory, she already knows about the supernatural stuff. By the point that we actually get her first animated cutscene, we see that she knows that this shit's real. We know that she knows that there is actually something else out there in the world that is not entirely good. So she wouldn't be the weirdest survivor to actually come to the game, seeing as maybe the entity grabs her from an alternate universe where she doesn't go as far into it or lose her mind to it. See, we're still learning about the new lore, so we don't exactly know where it goes, but I do find it interesting that the entity could pull her from a situation after she learns about it and after her friend dies before she eventually succumbs to it. And from the story that we see in her new lore, she does just seem like a normal high school girl who's just trying to survive high school with a dumbass friend who is driven insane by the hex marking. So I think it could be very interesting to pull her in as well. So the next one is the Wraith, Philip Ojomo. Now, he has had a new rift, but or an archive on its own, but it only showed him as a kid, what he had to do in his home country to survive, how he blew a bunch of people up with a gas can, which was actually kind of sick. So we know that he is accustomed to violence, accustomed to surviving, and that's the key thing when it comes to all of this. Now, his old lore isn't that bad, getting out of the country where he was, and they haven't updated this as far as more tomes go for him, but he ends up working at Auto Havens, and his boss is, you know, having him crush cars that have people in it, and he loses his mind from that. I feel like the entity could possibly pull him from a time right before he loses his mind, right before he figures that out, because of his backstory that we've now gotten in the new lore, the new tomes, because it does show in those new tomes and that new lore for him that he was a survivor from a very young age. So, and all of this is really based on, I feel like, the entity's curiosity. If we've learned anything from the entity over the past year and a half or so, maybe 2 years of these rifts and tomes, is that the entity is very curious, the entity has a lot of power, and the entity can pull anyone from any timeline at any point in time. So I feel like the entity's curiosity could cause it to bring some of these killers that could have been survivors in a different life or in a different time with one small event changed into the fray, into the fog, to survive against their evil counterpart. I feel like that's what this is all based around. And I feel like Philip, where he was surviving from a very young age, would be a very curious one for the entity to want to see. So I feel like he also fits into this. And the last one, of course, is one that people have actually wanted for a very long time. Since we've learned more about the spirit and everything else, we've all wanted Ren to be a survivor some way, somehow. And if they are finally doing that with Evan when it comes to pulling him into the fog from when he was resisting the entity, I do feel like Ren could be another perfect character to do, as she is the granddaughter of the Oni, and her father did lose his mind, kill her mother, and kill her. And it is shown in her tomes and her archive that she does have that Oni in her. She does have that fire in her when she was getting bullied by a group of douchebags that we all know from school. You know, she kind of lost it and beat the living shit out of them, so she already has it in her, which I think makes her a little bit more of a survivor. I think the entity would have even more of a reason to bring her in and actually survive against her grandfather and against her evil counterpart, because she was just kind of a normal high school girl with a bad bloodline. I think that is more interesting than even, you know, Yui being in the game as just a random ongoer who gets tracked by the Oni, because I feel like it's more interesting to have the granddaughter of the Oni with that bloodline, that cursed bloodline, that fire in her, to actually be a survivor herself and have to survive against her grandfather. Now, whether any of these characters will happen or could ever happen, I guess we'll find out pretty soon when it comes to this mid-chapter patch, because it feels like the best time to do something like this. But I feel like it'd be a very interesting thing to see, and it would expand a little bit more on what we know about the entity and the power that it holds, because yes, we have seen the entity pull different killers from different timelines. That's why the plague showed up late, because I guess the entity was just like, hey, I want to go further back in fucking time, dude, and like pulled the plague out of ancient Babylon and threw her in after all the other killers. So we know that the entity can travel back in time, and whenever it wants to travel back in time and pull new killers into the fray with these killers from present day. So I feel like it's interesting, and it could expand on its power, seeing as it would be pulling survivors who were killers from alternate timelines or from right before they became killers to actually survive against their evil counterparts, and even in Ren's situation, her Oni grandfather. It's either grandfather or great-grandfather. Maybe I've been saying that wrong the whole time. It's one of the two. I know she's granddaughter or great-granddaughter, either one. But I think this is a very interesting concept that I'd love to see behavior like actually expand upon, because I think that's one of the most interesting things in Dead by Daylight, and has been since I really got into the game back in 2016, the backstory of these characters. I would always go through, if I ever forgot a little piece of the backstories for the characters that were in the game, and I still do this. I go back over them and I read them. I watch the tomes, I watch the archive. It's one of the most interesting things in the game to me, which I hope we eventually get like a story-based game or game mode for Dead by Daylight. So I feel like expanding upon this lore, expanding upon the entity, and expanding upon the killers as survivors, and giving that little bit more backstory is just a very, very interesting thing. But I want you guys to let me know what you think about this in the comments down below. Are there any killers that I missed that you think could be survivors from an alternate timeline, or from right before they became killers? I know another one that I might see in the comics is Deathslinger, but he's always kind of a bad dude, so you never really know when it comes to that. But I'm very interested to hear what you guys have to say about this. But that is going to do it for me, dudes. Thank you so much for watching. I really appreciate it. If you want more videos like this, make sure to let me know in the comments down below, because I have plenty of fucking ideas. It's just if people want to watch them. But again, that's going to do it for me. I've been your host. My name is Tootin, and I'll see you dudes next time. Peace out.